Welcome to Nordhooker. My name is Matt. Assassin's Creed Valhalla is a game that has left me feeling deeply conflicted. I don't think I've ever played a game that I've loved and hated more than this one. The open world is beautiful, with lush vegetation, rich atmospheric simulation, a full day and night cycle, and beautiful vistas of ancient Roman ruins, deep caverns, and newly built cathedrals. The gameplay loop, although definitely peak Ubisoft, with endless collectibles and repetitive gameplay, it nonetheless works pretty well for me personally, given the beauty of the environments that you walk through and all the armor sets and cool weapons that you can find and try out in the game. That, combined with the variety of combat styles, has led me to sink quite a bit of time into just wandering about the virtual recreations of England, Norway, Ireland, and France, not even to mention the mythical realms of Svartalfheim, Jotunheim, and Asgard, which I've spent a great deal of time in just drinking in the atmosphere and listening to the music of the game. But for Assassin's Creed Valhalla, it's not the gameplay or the open world where I have my chief criticism. It's instead in the writing, where the game became fundamentally corrupted. The game takes a hybrid history-fantasy approach, with a mostly historic setting that's interspersed with visions of mythical locations beyond Midgard, some legendary creatures to fight, magical weaponry, and legendary armor sets. Beginning in the year 871 AD, the story follows the Viking Eivor and his or her crew, depending on which version of Eivor you pick, as the crew sails from Norway into England to establish the fictional Viking colony of Ravensthorpe.
In time, all of England will know of Ravenclan and the glory we brought to that fractured land. So to England, glory and destiny to England!
As a side note, it turns out that although the name Ravensthorpe was invented purely for the game, there actually is a real Ravensthorpe in Northamptonshire, which is a pretty cool detail. From here, the player embarks on a 60-hour campaign across England, completing quests, making alliances with regional kings and ealdormen, raiding settlements, conquering castles and towns, completing assassination missions, and fighting basically anything and everything you come across. Assassin's Creed as a series has always been steeped in history, with copious historical research put into recreating lifelike historical cities and countries, to medieval Rome, revolutionary Paris, and a scaled-down recreation of the entirety of Greece itself during antiquity. The series has made great efforts to bring history to life, and it's worth giving credit where it's due. I've talked to many people who've gotten fascinated with the subject matter of history in various eras just due to playing Assassin's Creed games. Many longtime fans of the series have grown frustrated at the inclusion of mythical elements into it, which is understandable, as the games have diverged more from the mostly grounded historical realism approach to something which includes much heavier doses of mythology. Although these choices are contentious, and there are other historical issues regarding clothing, battle tactics, armor, and so forth, the primary issue I'm addressing is in regards to how the characters are written. The writers of Valhalla fundamentally misunderstand the medieval mind. Either that, or they have knowingly written historical figures in a way that is disingenuous, in order to create a false portrayal of the history of the Anglo-Saxons and Scandinavians. People of the past experienced the world just as richly and just as vividly as you or I do today, if not more so. And in that sense, they were just like us, of course. But they did not think about the world in the way that we do. The great crime of the writers of Assassin's Creed Valhalla is their decision to turn real characters and historical figures into puppets, rather than embarking on an honest attempt to understand and portray the mindset, the values, and the beliefs of the people of the Viking Age, and treat them as real people with their own drives and motivations and understanding of religion and philosophy. The writers instead chose to create characters that function essentially as meat puppets, or avatars, for the modernist ideology and wish fulfillment of the writers themselves. Beginning in the opening sequence of the game, Ivor's mother is portrayed as a fierce warrior, taking out not one, but 6 fully grown, fully armored Norse warriors in open combat. Furthermore, the game's decision to let the player choose either a male or a female version of Eivor ends up having no repercussions on the way that other characters treat you in the narrative of the game. It doesn't have any significant effect on the dialogue choices or the options presented to you as a character. Although women in Viking Age Scandinavia did have slightly more legal authority than their counterparts on mainland Europe, such as being able to divorce and inherit land, the writers would have you believe that for the Norse in the Viking Age, both men and women were treated the same, and with women going raiding or even leading raids, rather than as distinct sexes with their own roles and natural purposes in their worldview.
The beacon has drawn the last of my soldiers. By tomorrow, our strength will have returned, and we can retake our city.
Let me give you some advice, old bear. The surest way to stop a wound from festering isn't with a blade. It's with fire!
And that's something that in recent years has been popularized by media, the idea that Norse female Viking warriors were a common sight or phenomenon, at the same time that women were not allowed to choose who they would marry or be able to hold positions of political power.
The one point of contrast here is the presence of a female Viking Eivor, because we have written and archaeological records of Scandinavian women kicking some serious ass. So while not quite par for the course, not all that out of place either.
We have one burial of a woman with grave goods that include a sword and an axe from Birka, Sweden in the 10th century. Swords in particular were of very high wealth and value in the 10th century, and the implications of this burial are unclear, as such a burial could indicate a warrior's burial, or could indicate the burial of a woman of high status, perhaps with the weapons belonging to her or her family. The absence of women Viking warriors in the sagas, as well as in accounts from those with whom the Vikings encountered, further refutes the pop culture image of women Viking warriors terrorizing the North Sea, as such a sight would have likely been so surprising and shocking to warrant writing down in accounts such as the Anglo-Saxon chronicles. This isn't to say definitively that no female Viking warriors ever existed as an exception, but rather that the archaeological and written accounts show very clearly a highly patriarchal society in which the role of a man was as a warrior, and where a strict boundary was enforced between practices associated with male and female behavior. This also isn't to say that women weren't involved in warfare and seafaring in any capacity either, as wives of Vikings were written to have camped and settled with the Vikings during the siege of Paris and cheered their men on into battle. And during the monumental discovery of Vinland, women such as Freydis, as mentioned earlier, and others were along for the journey to discover and settle North America. Curiously, Vikings are also portrayed with the same attitude towards homosexuality as most Westerners post-2010. I can't tell you how many times characters in this game randomly propositioned me for gay sex.
Yet I wonder, is there any skill of mine that I could impress upon you?
Even a fool has something to teach, whether they are aware of the lesson or not.
Hey, but I could show you how to wield my plow sword.
Now mind you, this is set at a time in Scandinavian history when to even accuse someone of having engaged in such an act obligated the accused to fight the accuser in a one-on-one battle to the death in a fight known as a home gang, lest his reputation be shamed and him thought of as unmasculine and violated. In general, popular historical entertainment often has characters sleep around with one another very frequently. You see this in many historical TV shows. And it's easy to forget that sex and pregnancy were much more inseparable in an age before modern birth control. Sex was not casual by any means in the medieval world, and although infidelity and promiscuity certainly existed throughout the age, and the medieval world was far from a sexless society, it was rarely thought of as a safe endeavor. With the complications and dangers associated with giving birth, and the risk of catching diseases being much higher in a time before modern medical technology, these dangers for women combined with the heightened value on lineage and the concern of raising another man's illegitimate child put greater social pressure to restrain sexual relationships so that they stayed between husbands and wives. If you want a clear view on how Viking men viewed their women, the first half of the Havamal provides a multifaceted perspective, from romantic love to general life advice. It's the closest thing we're ever going to have to proverbs, tweets, and green texts, directly from the Vikings themselves. The Vikings, which are the favored faction for the narrative of the story, are characterized as being openly friendly to non-Scandinavians, welcoming them in amongst themselves. If anything, this is more representative of modern Scandinavian nations rather than medieval Scandinavia.
What are your names?
Yenli. I'm a merchant, not a bandit like those others.
I am Sigurd Jarl of Fornberg, son of Styrbjörn. This is Eivor and Dag. Both of you are free to go, but more than welcome to stay if you're willing to pull your weight.
We'd be happy to, if only to get back on our feet.
Then let it be done. The Raven clan welcomes you.
By the end of the game, the village of Ravensthorpe has a Chinese woman and several Africans living there, the origins of the latter never being explained at all.
It all starts in Ravensthorpe, your home, where you will meet with Vaughn, a fellow Vikinger and a new ally.
How have you come to know me?
The Thousand Eyes have 1,000 years as well, and word travels fast.
And what is it I can do for you, or you for me?
The situation is as confusing and bizarre as if, in the game Ghost of Tsushima, there was a Frenchman and several Aztecs settling in one of the Japanese villages with no questions asked by the local Japanese or the main character Jin. They simply show up one day and live in Japan. Beyond this, the portrayal of the Anglo-Saxons is particularly strange too. Potentially taking inspiration from the Cheddarman study involving Mesolithic hunter-gatherers 8,000 years prior to the migration of the Anglo-Saxons, the developers chose to portray many Saxons with very dark features, such as the character Stowe. Anglo-Saxons, of course, had typical Germanic phenotypes, as one would expect. But instead, the developers chose to seemingly take a Cro-Magnon genetic analysis as a basis to make the characters look racially ambiguous. Although, if that was the goal, they don't seem to have matched the Mesolithic hunter-gatherer phenotype very well either. Perhaps the devs thought it would be confusing to differentiate between the Vikings and the Anglo-Saxons if they looked so similar, but ultimately it's unsettling to see actual historical populations be genetically redesigned, whether that's for gameplay or for ideology. The Saxons themselves in history would have looked rather similar to the Vikings, but as is often the case in Viking media, are made to look weak and frail faced with the warrior society of the Vikings.
Let's cut his throat now and water the orchards with his blood.
Oh, sweet lord, no! He's on the Isle of Ely, Ealdorman Wigmund, in the monastery, I swear.
Thought that would take till the next morn. Let's tie him up and let him rot away.
The same can also be said for how Christians are portrayed in the game, with Christian characters appearing typically as cowardly, sneaky, simpletons, or just plain dumb, and gives no indication as to why Vikings would possibly consider Christianity attractive.
Heathen, this is a place for proud converts like myself. I seek those who wish to join the great and superior holy path I am on. Yes, burn it down. Make a pyre of the past.
Curious, good man. What were you before you became so devout?
I was just like you, a stupid heathen, lost and violent.
I gave you a chance, heathen. I am a better, richer man for what I did. I changed course and... Fuck it! I am still the blood-hungry whore I once was. Fucking die, you putrid shit-eater! Die 1,000 ways and times like the others.
You would have sworn an oath to a pile of shit, you liar. Full of false pride. You should be judged at an Alding for your crimes.
The main character Eivor ends up rejecting both the Christian god and the pagan god Odin by the end of the game.
Leave me now. Nothing. With me. Wisdom. Glory. Power. What more do you need? Everything else.
He simultaneously rejects Odin while becoming him at the same time. So don't ask me to explain the continuity there. I don't think the writers understand it either. In the end, instead of an honest attempt to view the world through the eyes of the Scandinavians and the British natives of the 9th century, the Vikings in Assassin's Creed Valhalla are just toys for the writers to bash against archetypes of the English. In retrospect, it was definitely a mistake to have a French company set a game in medieval England. So instead of a nuanced and a profound exploration of medieval characters, the writers play out a fantasy of modern people in Viking cosplay, killing and raiding the lands of intolerant and backwards Christian Englishmen. I'll probably end up referencing this in every analysis, but Robert Eggers' film The Northman manages to succeed where Assassin's Creed Valhalla fails. Robert Eggers and Alexander Skarsgård make an honest and groundbreaking effort to portray the worldview of medieval northerners from their own eyes. The film doesn't seek to judge or condemn the importance of vengeance and honor for the characters, but instead does everything in its power to present it honestly, allowing the modern audience to determine for themselves how they feel about it. Robert Eggers understands that the Vikings lived in a world that was so different that it appears almost alien to the moral and spiritual sensibilities of most people of the 21st century.
But what got me fascinated was the rich mythology and poetry. As I learned more, even their wood carvings and visual artistic expression was also very inspiring. But I think when you're dealing with these pagans, they're the pagan in the period in our film, who every part of life is an expression of belief, and belief is an expression of every part of life. There is so much beauty in the way that they saw the world.
From the extreme value they placed on kin, family, and bloodline, to their wholly different understanding of violence, honor, and death, and their beliefs about the gods and the transcendent. They experience the world in a way that is almost impossible for the modern man to wrap his head around. When watching The Northman, there's not a moment in which the characters come across as insincere.
I guess I did a show called True Blood, and on that one, my character had been in the States for 2 centuries, but was originally a Viking, also named Northman, by the way, in his last name. But I never, there was something about being away from Sweden that long, playing characters from around the world, mostly American characters, that kind of awakened that desire to go back to my roots in a way, and to play a Viking was something that I was desperate to do.
They do not perceive time as a path towards civilizational or moral progress and advancement as people typically do today, nor seek hiding away from death and living out to old age and comfort, but instead view the world as a generational cycle of rebirth, of glory, of love, of duty, of blood, and of fire, culminating in the eventual destruction of all things. They lived in a world in which all that will echo into eternity is the bloodline and the deeds of a dead man. What makes the story of Assassin's Creed Valhalla so frustrating and disappointing is that the writers, with advising from historians, have clearly read at least some of the sagas, as is evidenced in their references to the Vinland sagas, the saga of Ragnar Lothbrok, the events detailed in the Anglo-Saxon chronicles, and countless archaeological findings, which they use to construct the digital world and context of the game. They could have chosen to remain honest to the people of the era, and to have crafted a genuine artistic work to be remembered and heralded for decades as a historical fantasy epic. Even the inclusion of mythical elements is not so far off, as pre-Enlightenment Europeans held the genuine belief that mythical and otherworldly beasts and monsters roamed the earth in the uncharted seas. Instead, they didn't take the path of honest character exploration, and wrote a story that will only remain as a curiosity of early 21st century historical propaganda.
I try to present this mindset, the Viking mind, whatever that is, without judgment. This is their beliefs. It's not my beliefs. It's not your beliefs. This is their beliefs. But even then, in not trying to romanticize their beliefs, I think with the revenge motif, as an audience member, part of you just wants him to get revenge, because that's the way these kinds of stories work. But you do ask questions, hopefully, if I've done my job, who's right and who's wrong? And that's one of the cool things about the sagas, is that they also, as far as the protagonists and the antagonists, there is often gray area there. They are full characters. And so I hope that, even in telling this story in a, about a culture who says you must revenge, and you're going to be shamed and criticized, and everyone's going to hate you, and you're a failure if you don't revenge, that we can still wonder if that's the right thing to do.
Now, why does any of this matter to begin with? After all, it's just a video game. Well, for better or worse, most people's engagement with history doesn't come from reading primary sources, but from entertainment media. You might be surprised at how many comments I get from people whose whole perception of the past is based on television shows more in line with cheap fantasy, rather than anything grounded in reality. And over the years, I've had to unlearn many things that I picked up on TV shows or was taught inaccurately in school. All of that is to say that the media people engage with matters, and experiencing a historical event in a video game sticks in a person's mind much better than a dry description in a textbook. That's why I encourage anyone who's creating historical entertainment, be it in television, in film, in writing, or in the video game industry, to find what they're most fascinated in and genuinely try to portray it with integrity and curiosity, treating the people of the past as real human beings instead of arrogantly sneering at them from a fallible moral high ground, or reshaping them, even worse, into just mere puppets for the loose agendas and moral whims of the age.
We wanted to look as real and truthful as possible. And when it turned out that he was incredibly passionate about Norse mythology and the Viking culture, it felt like the obvious choice, or a dream choice for us.
To leave on a brighter note, however, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the soundtrack of Valhalla. Composed by Sarah Schachner, Jesper Kyd, and Einar Selvik, this soundtrack is hands down one of the most beautiful and entrancing collections of music I've ever had the pleasure to listen to. Granted, it's in part because I'm very much biased and I love neo-folk and orchestral scores, but genuinely, if the genre has any appeal to you, I'd highly recommend that you take some time to listen to it, and I'd insist listen to the extended unreleased collection, which is something like 10 hours of music in total. It's incredible stuff, and truly the music alone will outlast the game itself as a masterful work of art. Finally, when it comes to historical media, the thing I want to leave you with the most is that it's critical, if you want to create a great work of art, to approach the people and the past and the places and the ideas of history with humbleness. If you go to it with arrogance, thinking that we're so much smarter and more advanced than these backwards people of a bygone era, there's a lot that'll be missed. The people of the past were as real as you and I here today. They had their own experiences that we can hardly dream of. They accomplished wonders that still inspire us today, and they saw the world in a remarkably different way. So instead of scoffing at the people of the past, we must instead approach them and their time on its own terms. And maybe through that, we can learn something from them. If you'd like to follow along with the channel, I produce plenty of content like this and I'll continue to post more very soon. Please feel free to subscribe, like the video, and let me know in the comments if there's any Viking media that you think is worth checking out, that I should review, that you think is a really good historical piece of media. I read all the comments. I really appreciate hearing from you guys. It's a lot of fun. So let's start a conversation. Thank you so much for watching.